So today we're going to talk about driving offenses, specifically reckless driving and leaving the scene of an accident. So this is all in my book, The Art of Proactive Criminal Defense. Here's some information about myself, former prosecutor, dad of two, hockey coach, and I've written 9 books, including this one on criminal defense in Michigan. So the timeline of a criminal case, typically, especially with a traffic case, with a reckless driving, leaving the scene, the police officer here would be your first contact. Typically, an accident occurs. Some information is gathered about your vehicle. The police look up where that driver's license or license plate is registered, and they may come to your house and issue you a ticket. Or it could be they find you down the road after an accident has occurred, or for something like reckless driving or careless driving, the officer may actually witness that crime occurring or that civil infraction occurring. So the first contact will typically be by the police. For leaving the scene, reckless, careless, those type of offenses, a lot of times the police department will issue the ticket with the charge already on it. The prosecutor may or may not add additional charges. But for traffic cases like these, typically the prosecutor will receive the ticket and the information and simply be the person in court who will make a deal, proceed to trial, be in charge of the case thereafter, but may not have an input in the actual charge, which differs with a lot of other cases where the prosecutor will make that decision. Ultimately, the case will go to the courthouse with the judge. So it goes police, prosecutor, then court. So in any criminal case, typically we have an arrest or a ticket is issued. If you are arrested, you will have to be released from custody with some sort of bond conditions. Those bond conditions can mean not traveling outside the state of Michigan, no drinking, no drugs, no new criminal offenses, and you must keep the court updated about all updates in terms of your address, phone number, and other information. For a case like reckless driving, careless driving, or leaving the scene, it's all about tracking the case. When will you have a court date? Will there be a warrant issued? What are your responsibilities with the court? In this tracking phase, this is where we get proactive because the police, prosecutor, and court are working together to prosecute you. What are you doing on your end in order to help your case? And this is what we talk about with being proactive. So here I have an example of a story. Michael reaches out to me about several charges. His ticket says reckless driving, but I asked him to send me the ticket because a lot of times a ticket will have multiple charges. It looks like in this particular case that Michael is charged with reckless driving, careless driving, and leaving the scene of an accident. So here we have 2 criminal misdemeanors and 1 civil infraction. When reviewing the ticket, I also asked Michael information about his criminal background, driving history, his career, and a summary of what happened. It's relevant if a client has past prior criminal offenses, points in their license. It's also relevant if they have a commercial driver's license. Relevant, of course, if they drive for work. Some clients have company vehicles. That's also important to be noted. In this case, Michael tells me that he has no criminal history, but he does work for the Ford Motor Company. He tells me that he's ambitious, and for his work, it requires a driver's license. At the time, he had a company car, so Michael may have to deal with his company directly on that. But I do advise clients that it's always the best to be honest, provide information as needed, and ultimately, we hope to have a great result, even though the case doesn't start off great. Michael tells me that he was driving about a mile from his house, and he tells me he was cut off by another driver. He became upset. He went too fast, chased the other car down, and during this chase, there was an accident. There was a verbal argument. Michael, being upset, he drove off, went home, and his intentions were to call the police. And here I have when a client tells me what happened, I understand that it's going to be their version of the case, their version to tell, but there may be facts that are left out, facts that are favorable in the client's mind. Of course, the other driver is going to have a different story, and a police officer, if Michael here is the one who left the scene, the police officer is by default going to put Michael on the defensive and the other driver as more of the victim of the case. So it's important to understand that there's always going to be 2 sides of a case, and sometimes I need to tell a client, okay, that's your version, but let's see what happens in terms of the police report and what the other driver stated, because that's the evidence that the prosecutor is going to proceed with. It's important to strike a balance with a new client. Of course, I want to be supportive of their story, but it does us no good if we just hear one side of the story. We have to be prepared for all scenarios. We have to think about how is the prosecutor, how is the judge going to view the case. And as I put here, the prosecutor and judge are just going to read the police report. They don't have our version. They don't have why we did what we did. We just have the police report. So we have to look at that and say, okay, this is a worst case scenario. How do we change the perception of the case? One part of that is certainly telling our story, but in my experience, it's more your actions rather than your words. So here, of course, Michael said his intentions were to call the police, but just because those were his intentions, it doesn't mean that's going to matter because he has no way to prove that. He, of course, could say, I was going to call the police, but if he didn't, he simply doesn't count. He didn't call the police. Here I have, in Michael's version, we don't know the full picture until we see the police report, but I do my best to educate Michael on all of these charges. A lot of times people view a traffic ticket as a less serious criminal charge. Oh, this is a traffic ticket, it's not a criminal charge. Traffic tickets can actually be more serious because they are, one, they are misdemeanors, and two, they could impact your driver's license. They also go on your driving record. So for a typical criminal case, it may go on your criminal record. You're not going to get points on your license. But for a misdemeanor, like leaving the scene of an accident, it would appear on your criminal record, your driving record, and you would receive points. I also tell them that there are no dismissal programs for driving offenses. In Michigan, for certain offenses, I'm a first offender, I can earn dismissal here if I stay out of trouble. That does not exist for a criminal traffic ticket. So the goal up front is to get the best result from the prosecutor, not, well, I go on probation and I'll have the case dismissed. That's not an option here. There's also no way to expunge a traffic offense. So if a misdemeanor goes on your record for a traffic offense, such as leaving the scene or reckless driving, there's no way to go back 5 years later to have a judge take it off your record. It's going to be there potentially forever because there's no expungement. So I educate Michael. I tell him the reckless driving charge carries 6 points on your license and a 90-day hard suspension. So in a lot of ways, reckless driving is worse than a drunk driving for your driver's license suspension. I also tell them that a careless driving is 3 points on your license, and a leaving the scene could be categorized as 0 to 6 points, depending upon how it's written up. There are similar offenses that have 0 points, but for the most part, leaving the scene of an accident, the way it's written with those words, would be 6 points on your driving record and a criminal misdemeanor. So when confronted with multiple charges, I look back to my days as a prosecutor. I think, okay, why did they charge Michael with all of these offenses? Why did the police officer write down leaving the scene, reckless driving, careless driving? It's to create leverage, to put Michael in the worst situation as possible in order to extract some sort of plea bargain from him. What does that plea bargain look like? Did Michael do anything wrong here? Because Michael has a past driving record for speeding, that is relevant, but there are no serious flaws because he doesn't have a criminal record. Speeding, of course, is not ideal, but it is not a deal breaker. But the prosecutor will still view Michael as someone who's sped in the past. In this case, he was being careless, he was being reckless. Michael is a troublemaker on the road. And they'll think, well, for every speeding ticket Michael receives, well, 99 of those he'll get away with. So I have here, we have to overcome the asshole factor. And that doesn't mean the client is an asshole. It means that the prosecutor looks at the case and sees the facts and says, this guy's an asshole. Someone that they see on the road driving on the highway and they say, well, that guy's an asshole. They don't know anything about my client, but just based upon the speeding, the aggressive driving that they witnessed, even in past cases, of course, the prosecutor didn't see Michael in this case, but they compare him to other drivers they've seen in their life that have gotten them upset or they've had opinions on. So we have to overcome this factor. The prosecutor will never meet Michael. They'll simply view him as a name and a charge. We need to change that. Here I have the prosecutor creates an image in their head on their own driving interactions. That's where the asshole factor comes into play here. Once Michael and I begin working together, what we want to do is track down the police report, and we want to begin to change the perception of the case. Michael here will be labeled a dangerous driver, and the other driver will be considered the victim here. Michael, of course, has the option to go to trial on all 3 charges, but there is a great risk there. Going to trial on 3 charges, there's no independent witnesses who could tell the real story. There may not be any video because the officers were not involved until it already happened. It's essentially going to be the one driver's word against the other driver's word. And Michael, in this case, there's a risk that he can have multiple criminal charges on his record, lose his driver's license, have points. There's a lot of bad things that can happen for Michael. So what we want to do here is, what can we work out here? What can we figure out that puts Michael in a position where he's able to drive a car, potentially avoid points on his license, and limit his criminal liability? We don't want to put Michael on the stand necessarily here because it opens him up to additional liability. If we can figure out something that makes Michael satisfied, potentially no probation, no loss of driver's license, Michael may say, hey, you know what, I was wrong that day. What if you can save my driver's license? I don't go on probation. I don't go to jail. What can we figure out here? What can I learn from this situation? So here's how we get proactive. I ask Michael to keep an open mind. I tell him that we need to isolate the situation and work on being better the next time. Michael gives me all the information about himself. We want to present him in the best possible fashion. We don't want him to be a dangerous or irresponsible person. We want to present him in the manner that he is. He's a hardworking, ambitious person who simply, for a moment in time, got upset with the other driver. He made a poor choice in his decision, but this is not who Michael is. So what we want to do here is we want to do what I call a driver improvement program approved by the state of Michigan. We may want to do some community service. We want to present Michael's professional experience, his education, to take the case outside of the 4 corners of the traffic ticket and really highlight who Michael is. If Michael can show that he is someone who's humbled by this experience, willing to learn from it, move forward and make better choices, this is how we get the best result for Michael. So if you or someone in your life is dealing with a similar situation, I encourage you to reach out to me. We can talk about your options, and I look forward to helping you.